All right, so I'll just get started then. So, like you said, this presentation is entitled "The Stars Are Right: Exploring the Catan as Lovecraftian Horror in the Black Library." Now, American pulp author Howard Phillips Lovecraft has had an undeniable effect on modern science fiction and horror media. Central to Lovecraft's writing, and the greatest fear that he wished to convey to his reader, was that of the utter insignificance of humankind. His work reinforces the idea that Earth and the human beings living upon it are less than specks of dust in the overarching schemes of the universe, and the transcendent beings that stride through it all will regard us and our planet with less regard than one might an anthill upon the sidewalk. This literary motif developed into the genre of cosmic horror, used interchangeably with Lovecraftian horror after the author who pioneered it. The heart of this genre lies in the idea of cosmicism, which is described by Lovecraft scholar S.T. Joshi in his biography of Lovecraft, I Am Providence, as, quote, the depiction of the boundless gulfs of space and time and the risible insignificance of humanity within them. This insignificance is often reinforced by Lovecraft's pantheon of alien deities known as the Great Old Ones. The Great Old Ones are a quintessential aspect of Lovecraft's fiction and can drive a human being mad with their mere presence. Joshi discusses the symbolic significance of Lovecraft's gods, stating that they are, quote, symbols of all that lies unknown in the boundless cosmos, and the randomness with which they can intrude violently into our own realm is a poignant reflection of the tenuousness of our fleeting and inconsequential existence. These gods have formed the foundation of Lovecraftian horror, and a myriad of writers since Lovecraft's time have made their own additions to the monstrous pantheon. The Great Old Ones serve to reinforce humanity's insignificance, being far more advanced than humanity, and often far more vast in size. Lovecraft himself describes the awakening of the infamous Great Old One Cthulhu by stating, quote, a mountain walked or stumbled. This genre of Lovecraftian horror has gone on to inspire monoliths of science fiction and horror culture, such as notably John Carpenter's film The Thing, the movie Event Horizon, and several of the works by author Stephen King, and of course, Warhammer 40k. Warhammer, of course, draws from a multitude of sources for inspiration, and Lovecraft stands prominently among them. The tentacled faces of tyrannid monsters such as lictors and the Umgarl gene stealers homage Lovecraft's octopus-headed deity Cthulhu, and the roiling, mythically inspired landscapes of the Warp are reminiscent of Lovecraft's dreamlands. Yet it is the Catan, the dead gods of the Necrontyr, that Lovecraft's influence shines through the strongest. The Catan are roughly analogous to Lovecraft's Great Old Ones, hailing from faraway stars and offering strange and terrible boons to those who worship them. At first glance, the Warhammer universe may seem to resist Lovecraft's cosmicism. As opposed to Lovecraft's works, humanity stands front and center within Warhammer's Milky Way galaxy. Unlike Lovecraft's ill-fated protagonists, humankind is more than able to fight back against the galaxy's horrors, and with larger-than-life characters such as the Emperor of Mankind and his Primarchs, win great victories against godlike beings. But cosmicism can still be found within the stories of this universe, even if we discount the eternally crumbling Imperium's hopeless struggles. We find a story which aligns well with Joshi's definition in the history of the Necrons, and even more so, the history of the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr suffered throughout their history under a merciless sun, which gave them disease-racked, short lives. They would also wage a disastrous war against a mysterious race known as the Old Ones, perhaps another nod to Lovecraft's Great Old Ones. This conflict, known as the War in Heaven, devastated the Necrontyr and drove them to desperation. It was then that the ill-fortuned species would discover a diffuse energy being feeding on the energy of the very sun that had so long tormented them. The Necrontyr incarnated this star god in a body of living metal, and more soon followed. The incarnated Catan would go on to offer the Necrontyr a bargain. Quote, they offered the Necrontyr a path to immortality and stability their race had always craved. Their cursed flesh would be replaced with living metal in imitation of their gods. Their discarded husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would be free to pursue their vengeance against the Old Ones and an uncaring universe, freed forever of the weakness of their mortified flesh. So the Necrontyr became the Necrons, and wrought destruction upon the Old Ones before turning their guns back upon the gods that had enslaved them, and shattered the Catan into myriad shards. The 5th edition Necron Codex describes this shattering, stating, quote, "In their arrogance, the Catan did not realize their danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons too mighty for even the Catan to endure. Alas, the Catan were immortal star spawn, part of the fundamental fabric of actuality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each Catan instead sundered into thousands of fragments." This seeming destruction of the Catan will be addressed in time, but it is the knowledge and eldritch secrets that the Catan offer the Necrontyr that sets them as analogues to Lovecraft's Great Old Ones. In Lovecraft's description of the Great Old Ones in his short story, The Dunwich Horror, the Old Ones are described thusly, quote, "The Old Ones were, the Old Ones are, and the Old Ones shall be. Not in the spaces we know, but between them. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us, unseen." This description matches the descriptions of the Catan before they were incarnated in their living metal bodies. They are energy beings, star vampires, and facets of the physical universe. Additionally, after their shattering, shards may recombine with one another, eventually perhaps reforming into a complete star-devouring god. Even this rejoining of the Catan can be related to Lovecraft, especially the supposed wounding of Cthulhu at the climax of Lovecraft's short story, The Call of Cthulhu. At the end of this story, a sailor named Johansen rams Cthulhu's head with a boat, popping it, and, quote, "For an instant, the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and there was only a venomous seething astern, where, God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn was nebulously recombining in its hateful original form." One must wonder how much damage the Necrons truly did to their gods, and if one day, like the Great Old Ones, they may return to their full and terrible power. Beyond the history of the Necrontyr, when the Catan are physically described, it is done in the same manner as Lovecraft's nightmarish deities. Some of the most evocative descriptions of the Catan come from the 3rd edition Necron Codex. While much of the lore presented in this text has been retconned by the Necron's refresh during the game's 5th edition, this book still lays out the thematic groundwork for the Catan, and these themes survive 5th edition's shattering of the star gods. The 3rd edition Codex portrays the Catan as truly alien and monstrous. The description of the Nightbringer evokes a being who, much like Lovecraft's gods, is far above the concerns of mortal beings. The Codex states, "We are less than cattle," quote, "We are less than cattle to these beings, chattel to be cast aside, consumed, or made sport with for their pleasure. There is not one among them that would pay heed to a world of man as I would an ant on my boot," which presents a chilling image of the Catan's power and might. The fact that this quote is attributed to an inquisitor, among the most fearless of the Emperor's servants, lends weight to this proclamation. In particular, the Nightbringer is described in especially Lovecraftian terms, with the Codex stating, quote, "It was as silent as the void, and to look upon it was to know terror. It drifted above us with slow, liquid grace, and its gaze caused madness and despair wherever it fell. Those who came near took their own lives rather than endure its hellish presence." This description drives home both the horror of the Nightbringer, but also its Lovecraftian influences. This description in particular mirrors that of the Great Old One Cthulhu. Lovecraft describes the awakening of the Great Old One in grim terms, stating that, quote, "The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such shrieking abysms of immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. After vigitillions of years, great Cthulhu was loose again, and ravening for delight." These beings similarly cause death and madness wherever they tread by virtue of their sheer alien nature. But Lovecraft's reference to the Great Old One ravening for delight fits with the portrayal of the Catan as well. The star gods are capricious, and once given animate form by the Necrontyr, the Nightbringer, quote, "craved worshippers and slaves, though many of its servants soon descended into murderous insanity, unable to withstand the horrifying, bloodthirsty visions its presence brought on." The repeated references to madness and terror are consistent across descriptions of both pantheons, and their motives are similarly inscrutable. While their goals are unknowable, the C'tan's gifts to the Necrontyr, twisted immortality and powerful weapons to wage war on the Old Ones, mirrors what the cult of Cthulhu in Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu believe the risen Great Old One will do for them. In this text, Lovecraft writes what shall herald the return of the Great Old Ones. Lovecraft writes that, quote, "The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the Great Old Ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated Old Ones will teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom." While Lovecraft's text contains an element of revelry absent from the descriptions of the C'tan, the star gods undoubtedly promised the Necrontyr new ways to kill with powerful weapons and starships. Moreover, the C'tan promised freedom from flesh, from mortality. The similarities in both of these pantheons of alien gods, offering freedom at a terrible price, helps to continue to mirror the C'tan and the Old Ones. In Nate Crowley's novel Twice Dead King Reign, the Necron overlord Oltix remarks on this bargain. Crowley writes that the C'tan had been gods of the worst sort. They had offered the Necrontyr victory not just over the ancient foes of the Old Ones, but over death itself. Zarek had accepted their boon, but only discovered too late the price his people would pay. Freedom from death, it transpired, was to be achieved by the abandonment of life. The C'tan and the Great Old Ones both offer this Faustian bargain. In return for worship, they will usher in a new era for those who dare give them tribute. Then, of course, the 5th edition Necron Codex was published, and the history of the C'tan irrevocably changed. Now the Necrons have turned upon their gods, shattered them into shards, small fragments of themselves. At face value, this presents a problem with the Lovecraftian interpretation of the C'tan, as destroying the Great Old Ones is far outside the scope of Lovecraft's cosmicism. Yet even in this new post-shattering continuity, the C'tan continue to inspire fear. In Robert Rath's The Infinite and the Divine, the Necron overlord and antiquarian Trazen the Infinite comes face to face with a shard of the Deceiver and reacts with pure terror. Rath's description of Trazen echoes Lovecraft's prose, quote, "Trazen the Infinite, overlord of Salamence, master of the prismatic galleries, a being who had known death 1,000 times and captured the most wild and terrifying things in the galaxy, began to scream." Trazen's fear is the core of this passage, and it is a poignant reminder of the horror of the C'tan. Trazen's agelessness and familiarity with death are made clear here, and yet he reacts as one of Lovecraft's protagonists might after gazing upon a Great Old One. The terror that the Necrons hold their former masters in speaks volumes to the eldritch might of the C'tan. Crowley describes the reminiscence of Oltix, of the horrors of the C'tan in Twice Dead King Reign, stating, quote, "It had been on the day of biotransference, as the C'tan themselves had drifted, vast and tattered, through the ash plumes of the immolated Necrontyr. The evocatory medium had taken Oltix's only memory of that day, but the echo of that hunger, that malevolence, could never be expunged." This recollection retains the horrific imagery used to describe both the C'tan and Great Old Ones, their maddening hunger and their vastness which dwarfs the Necrontyr. H.P. Lovecraft has left an indelible mark on the grim, dark universe of Warhammer 40,000. His stories of monstrous alien gods have gifted the setting not only its grotesque body horror and unique monsters, but contributes to the palpable air of dread in the universe's vast history. The C'tan loom large over the war in heaven and continue to be a source of nightmares to both the Necrons as well as the Imperium. Due to Warhammer's nature as a wargame, the C'tan are not afforded the same indestructibility as Lovecraft's Great Old Ones, and yet they serve much the same purpose. Even shattered, they are a reminder of the vastness of the cosmos, and their reality-bending power narratively humbles those who confront them. As Lovecraft's infamous couplet, attributed to the fictional text of occult knowledge, the Necronomicon, states, quote, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons, even death may die." Perhaps the C'tan, like the Great Old Ones, are simply waiting for the stars to be right once more. Thank you very much, and here are my citations, my sources for this presentation. Thank you very much.